They call him the JP Morgan of crypto, right?
Yeah, the Michael Jordan of crypto, if you will.
Sam Bankman-Fried has been called many things. He was once called a billionaire who was also your friend. Now he's the fraudulent founder who fooled ordinary people. He was once also called a humble philanthropist, someone who wanted better for the world. Now he's a criminal and a crook who wiped out millions of people's life savings. There are many different ways of talking about SBF, and all of them contradict each other. He faces perhaps one of the most stunning falls from grace of this century. But how did it happen? What set off this chain reaction and led to his downfall? And what would happen if he tried to outrun his past mistakes, his present disgrace, and the jail cell that awaits him in the future? In this video, we'll discuss the problems that brought down FTX, the charges levied against SBF and his co-conspirators, the consequences they will face, and what will happen if he becomes a fugitive. 10 days was all it took to bring one of the greatest crypto exchange empires down to its last breath. And it all started with one report. On November 2nd, 2022, CoinDesk published this report, which revealed that the majority of Alameda's $14.6 billion in assets were in a made-up currency called FTT, which was generated by its sister company, FTX. And soon, things spiraled out of control. Upon discovering this report, the Binance CEO, CZ, announced on Twitter that he sold $2.1 billion worth of his FTT tokens. And what happens when $2.1 billion worth of FTT suddenly enters the FTX market? Their value drops. Panicked FTX users rushed to sell their tokens in hopes of not losing all of their savings. FTX crashed, and all of Alameda's assets that were in the form of FTT tokens became worthless. While these fires were raging, SBV took to Twitter, assuring everyone that everything was fine. But then an Excel spreadsheet was leaked by the Financial Times, which showed a disastrous balance sheet. Alameda had $1 billion in assets against $9 billion in liabilities. Here is what Caroline Ellison, the co-CEO of Alameda, confessed in her court hearing.
She spoke to the relationship between FTX and Alameda. She said that Alameda was borrowing money from FTX.com and had an unlimited line of credit. This arrangement allowed Alameda to use this money without being required to post collateral.
On November 11th, FTX filed for bankruptcy. And just when you'd think things couldn't get any worse, they did. FTX was hacked. $600 million were stolen. Then another bombshell dropped. People began noticing that their tokens were disappearing. They were locked out of their accounts. It was uncovered that there was a secret company backdoor through which Alameda regularly used customers' money without their knowledge or their consent in order to pay back its creditors. This was textbook embezzlement. Around $10 billion just went missing, and 1 million people lost their life savings. SBV's deceptive PR image shattered, and he had nowhere to hide. Listen to this uncomfortable exchange during his interview with Good Morning America.
FTX went bankrupt is because FTX deposits were used to pay Alameda's creditors. Carolyn Ellison said you knew about that. Is that true?
You know, best I can tell, Alameda did have a big position open on FTX. That position, I think, was, very over-collateralized.
Notice how he goes off tangent, throwing in complicated terms to avoid answering the question. This is something that the interview caught on quickly and pointed out.
I am no cryptocurrency expert, I'm no finance expert, but I don't think you answered my question.
The interviewer had to ask that same question, not once, not twice, but 5 times, so that he could get a straight answer out of SBF. Let's see what happened when he was backed into a corner here. Observe this exchange in the interview.
If Alameda is borrowing the money that belongs to FTX depositors, that's a bright red line, isn't it?
There are a lot of cases where that's actually explicitly part of the program's and that are
But
happening.
not
and
here.
people are
Here
all
it
paid.
says that the digital assets may not be loaned to FTX trading. They can't be loaned out.
This is fascinating, as the man whose entire PR campaign was to appear as the good guy seemed to be struggling to find a defense, and, in fact, mumbling dejectedly when that accusation was thrown at his face. The humble, down-to-earth man that he so desperately presented himself as turned out to be nothing but a crook. But he didn't entirely drop the act.
What happened after that?
So you don't know what happened to those $5 billion?
They were wired to Alameda. I wasn't running Alameda, but I can now go back and take a guess at what, where they were ultimately spent or used.
SBV gave interview after interview following the scandal, saying over and over again that he had no idea that Alameda was stealing the users' money. No one believes him, though. As of today, the Department of Justice has released an 8-count indictment, and the grand jury has stated that this FTX disaster was not a result of mismanagement or poor oversight, but it was actually intentional fraud. Here are all of the crimes SBF has been charged with. Conspiracy to commit wired fraud. Committing wired fraud towards customers. Conspiracy to commit wired fraud against lenders. Committing wired fraud against lenders. Conspiracy to commit commodity fraud. Conspiracy to commit security fraud. Conspiracy to commit money laundering. Defrauding the US and committing violations against campaign laws. And just like that, SBF's glory burned down right before our eyes. He now awaits 115 years in prison, which is effectively a life sentence and then some. The final nail in the coffin arrived when the co-CEOs of Alameda, Caroline Ellison and Gary Wang, both pled guilty to their white-collar crimes and agreed to cooperate with the authorities and come clean about Alameda's business malpractice. They've also stated that SBF was the primary decision-maker and executive at Alameda. No actions were taken without his approval. This damning evidence comes at a time when SBF's main line of defense in interviews was to distance himself from Alameda and its insidious workings.
2 insiders who were with him, presumably during all of the pivotal moments at stake in the case, saying, "We conspired with others, presumably Sam Bankman-Fried, and we intentionally did something wrong." So that is very difficult if you are defending Sam Bankman-Fried to overcome, because you could say maybe one of the cooperating witnesses is lying, but when you get to two cooperating witnesses, it's much harder to make that case before a jury.
On December 12, 2022, just before his congressional hearing, the disgraced CEO was arrested by the authorities. This case is set to go to trial in October of 2023. SBF is currently released on a $250 million bail agreement secured by his parents' California house. He's under house arrest after surrendering his passport and agreeing to wear an ankle monitor. That doesn't mean that he's given up. Through Zoom interviews and Twitter Space interactions, SBF remains very much in the public light, pointing fingers and tossing out blame and speaking to any media outlet that would listen. In fact, he made a Substack blog for this very purpose. In his first newsletter, SBF claimed that Alameda lost money due to a market crash and that he hasn't run Alameda for the past few years. It's been agreed by several lawyers that everything he says in his blog can be used against him. As a prosecutor, you'd want him to keep digging his own grave. But as a defense lawyer, you'd want him to stay silent.
If you're Sam Bankman-Fried's attorney, I mean, this is what you're not supposed to do. And the reason is this, it's simple. These types of statements can only be used against you. You can't use these types of self-serving statements at trial. That would be hearsay, of course. So if you're Bankman-Fried's lawyers, you're begging, you're pleading, you're telling him, keep your mouth shut, stay off social media. This is not going to help your case.
But would he try to escape? Earlier on, a Twitter user tracked his private plane and discovered that it made a trip to Argentina. Many speculated that this was an attempt to flee from the legal mess he was so deeply stuck in. However, this turned out to be false. And think about it, this is a very high-profile case. Very rarely do such cases get covered in this intense media scrutiny, especially when the fraudulent founder himself is so eager to publicly talk about it. And with the extradition treaty between the US and the Bahamas, things were not taken lightly when SBF was handed over by the Bahamas to the US authorities. Moreover, given his strict bail conditions and house arrest, SBF has nowhere to go. However, for a minute, let's assume SBF fools the authorities and manages to flee from the country. Where would he go? The US has extradition treaties with over 120 countries. There are very few corners of the world where it would be possible for him to run and hide. According to Judge Gorenstein, who approved SBF's bail arrangement, it would be impossible for him to carry out any business activities or hide anywhere. People know him everywhere, both from his face and all the crimes to his name. He can't scurry away like Do Kwon, the disgraced founder of crypto markets, Terra USD, and Luna Coins, who is charged with similar crimes. Do Kwon is from South Korea, which has extradition treaties with only 32 countries. This is about 4 times less than the US. As a result, while Do Kwon can bounce from Singapore to Dubai to Serbia, SBF might be trapped in his cage. Any violation of his bail agreement, including attempts to flee from the country, would be a financial nightmare for not just him, but also his parents and the 2 individuals who signed the bail agreement. The $250 million agreement is, in fact, a bond. This means that SBF and all of his co-signers are not obligated to pay this amount unless some part of the agreement has been violated. Imagine the headlines, the media coverage, and the public outrage. The US authorities would be deemed incompetent. This is not a good look for the SEC, which, you could argue, should have introduced some regulatory legislation on cryptocurrencies that could have prevented all of this mess in the first place. If there's one thing for certain, it's this. SBF simply cannot run away from his actions. He might have been able to wriggle out of this tight situation before, but since both Caroline Ellison and Gary Wayne have confessed and come clean, it's only a matter of time before more insidious actions may come to light. Until then, leave a comment below and tell us what you think of this entire fiasco. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with your friends.